If you're able to get a lot stronger, you can then move more weight in your hypertrophy training,
Yeah.
which in turn helps you grow more. So being strong is an underrated aspect of being big. And I think it's actually something a lot of people miss because they'll just consistently hit hypertrophy training and not really change up, to your point, not really cycle through different kinds of programming. And then they leave some gains on the table because they're not actually getting stronger. And then they're not able to progress their lifts in hypertrophy as much as they would otherwise. Welcome to Iron Summit, the podcast where we dive deep into the art and science of becoming your best self, blending expert insights on strength training, smart recovery, optimal nutrition, and mindset mastery to help you elevate your game.
All right, so we're live. Max just told me he just hit a push day and then ate 1,300 calories. What'd you eat?
We had some beef
Nice.
and some rice. Well, actually not some, a lot of both. It was like 10 ounces of beef, basically like 2.5 cups of rice.
Okay.
And then 20 ounces of Fairlife chocolate milk.
Nice. 20 ounces. That's a good amount.
I'm still working on that.
Fairlife's so good.
You want to get big, just add 20 ounces of Fairlife chocolate milk to all your meals.
Honestly, not a bad like bulking strategy. Like that's would legitimately help, and especially chocolate milk, you're getting a bunch of extra sugars and stuff,
20 ounces is like, it's like, 20 ounces is, so it's 350 calories. It's like 32 grams of protein, 32 grams of carbs, and 11 grams of fat.
Dude, call me crazy.
There's a lot of sugar in there, which is why I usually do it only after I'm done lifting. But
I definitely like the chocolate milk, like it's good, but I've always been such a big fan of just like their regular milk. Like I
do love it. Do you like the 2% or the whole milk? What do you do?
I think it's the 2% that we had it in college, man. I used to drink like 3 of them a day. It was at our nutrition station. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the 2%.
So good. And their core powers are good too.
Oh yeah. Little microplastics never hurt anyone,
You got to build your tolerance,
Exactly, man. Well, I was thinking about this the other day. Like, we're really worried about microplastics now, which maybe that's a real thing to be worried about. But 100 years ago, we were burning like soot. You were living in homes that had, like fire exhaust coming into the house. You're breathing in that crap. Like, every generation's going to have some kind of issue. Before that, you go back to the Paleolithic area, you were sleeping outside and saber-toothed cats were coming to eat you. Like, we're always going to have something.
We had lead paint. What's it? Asbestos?
Asbestos and lead paint for our parents.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just always something.
I agree. I think the thing with microplastics is it's literally in everything, and like they're finding, like you take anybody's random blood and you're finding it. So I don't know. I think the dose is so high now.
Yeah, and is that leading to a lot of the diseases that are more prevalent now? Maybe. Yeah. Or doesn't mean absolutely nothing. Also maybe. It's kind of cool to be made out of part plastic,
One thing about humans is we are very resilient. So like, I don't know, like you ever seen that Super Size Me documentary?
Yeah, insane.
I mean, you can treat your body like a trash can and it's not going to be optimal, but our body usually figures out a way to make something work. So imagine if you're doing the right thing. So I don't know. You're not going to be able to like avoid it completely, but it's probably not great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's like, for me, like with Fairlife, I can't drink normal milk because I'm super lactose intolerant. And then and then I don't really like the oat milk or the other milk alternatives because there's just devoid of protein. It's basically just like a sugary carb. So
dude, oat milk's the best option, not good for you either.
Yeah, and they process it intensely. And then, so the best option for me is Fairlife or Dairy Gold or something, but all those have microplastics because of the way they're bottled. So I'm just like, damned if you do, damned if you don't.
You got to open up your own Fairlife factory with glass bottles or something.
There you go. Organic Fairlife in glass bottles. That's our business plan,
So
Ryan.
can you eat like ice cream? Like, how do you feel about? I didn't realize you were that lactose intolerant. Like, I knew it upset your stomach.
No ice cream whatsoever.
Dang, dude.
I can have like dairy alternative ice creams. I can throw a
Those suck.
Fairlife in the Ninja Creamy.
That's good. That's good, but it's not like a full fat milk based
No,
ice
I
cream,
can't.
dude.
If I have anything with like lactose in it, it's not good. Like I'm like hurting for days. So I'm super lactose intolerant. Like, and lactase doesn't really do anything. It has to be like Fairlife where all the lactose is gone.
Yeah,
Or
that's
whey.
crazy.
Whey is fine because like protein powder is fine. Those have no lactose in it.
Yes.
Parmesan's okay because that has like really, really minuscule amount of lactose. And that's about all I can do for dairy.
Dang, dude.
Honestly, Fairlife was like revolutionary for me. I've never had milk in my life until Fairlife.
That's crazy. Yeah, Fairlife's phenomenal. But yeah, that is nuts, dude. I knew somebody that was lactose intolerant and celiac, and I was like, you can't eat anything other than like meat and fruit.
That's tough. I mean, they're probably super healthy, but
Yeah, that's true.
well, and so when I was growing up, they didn't really have any dairy alternative besides soy. So I was just all soy growing up. So whatever you
You were
want
a
to say
soy
about,
boy.
yeah, soy boy. Whatever you want to say about soy, that's you're aiming it at me.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, it is crazy how far that stuff's gone. Even like, there's some gluten-free stuff now that's like, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But it used to be such a disgusting difference between, like a
Oh yeah,
gluten-free piece of bread or, whatever. So
yeah.
yeah. Max, I wanted to talk to you, dude, today, like maybe a little bro science, maybe a little science, but just like looking back at your lifting career, and times when you're really putting on muscle mass, what are maybe some things that you feel like worked the best anecdotally for you in putting on muscle mass? Like something that you like had a noticeable difference, like this actually moved the needle for you.
Oh yeah. And I want to ask you the same thing because you've been going through your own little experiment here since moving on from wrestling. So you've got a fresher perspective. But the thing broadly that moved the needle the most for me was nutrition and eating just a silly amount of food. And it was actually, we talked about it on the podcast with him, Alan Watkins, when he wrote me my first diet to really move up to heavyweight. It was like shock the body amount of food. It was like 6.5, 7,000 calories. It wasn't that every day, kind of like cycled. You can't, I don't care who you are. Maybe if you're 400 plus pounds, you can eat that consistently. But it was like every third day I'd eat that much. It was just eating till I was uncomfortably full all the time. It was not fun, but it worked. And that's when I went from like 230 to around 250 in a summer, was just pounding food. The lifting is important. Obviously, you got to be consistent with that, but we've talked about this all the time. The lifting is the easy part. It's the diet and the nutrition. We were talking about Pat Davidson just a couple weeks ago. It's like relentless when you're bulking. And you have to be willing to get uncomfortably full multiple times a day to really impact, like to gain muscle quickly or quote unquote bulk. You want to do it really slowly over a long period of time. That's a different story. But I also think in order to like push past your body's set point, similar to with fat loss, you got to kind of like hit it hard. You know, shock the system a little bit for a while, and then you can maybe trim it back. Because if you just super slowly change it, I'm not sure you're going to ever see like your body's kind of, your metabolism is just going to keep catching up to what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's me anecdotally, not the scientific median or mass center of mass. That's just my experience, but I think a lot of people would agree. What about you so far? What have you noticed?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Talking with like Pat Davison last episode, and then just a lot of other fitness guys we've talked to, and just like anecdotally, I think you're right. Like lifting's super important, right? You got to be training, but food's a big thing. Everybody screws up the food. That's like the biggest lever. If I'm looking at like what actually helps with that, I think one of the easiest things for me is like make sure you have 50 grams of protein with breakfast. If you don't do that, like you're playing catch up all day. And then you're going to have to throw some snacks in there because it's just really hard when you're trying to get some calories in to do it with like 3 square meals, especially sometimes your day gets busy and you get behind. Then you have to have, 2,000 calories in a meal. It's not great. So I think you hit the nail on the head with food and just having that plan, and your body adjusts quickly to that too. So like continuing to revamp that plan as your metabolism changes.
Yep. I think one thing I've done for a long time now, really since moving up to heavyweight, is I try and eat as soon as I wake up to really end that fasting window a little earlier. I don't eat too late either. And that's something I changed. I used to, like, when I was trying to get in 7,000 calories, I'd eat up till pretty much the moment I was going to sleep, and then eat again when I was waking up. Not my favorite thing for your stomach. But one thing I have done is when I wake up, pretty much right away, I will have 2 scoops of protein, whey protein, a good quality protein, like a grass-fed whey isolate, which is 50 grams right there. And that is not hard to get down.
Do you think grass-fed really makes a difference with whey protein?
Probably not, but most of the time when it's grass-fed, it's also like got less ingredients in it. It's just kind of like an easy way to filter out some of the junk.
That's true.
But no, actually, and a lot of times I won't even use grass-fed. Like the dimetized whey isolate, I've used it for a while. That has never hurt my stomach. It's really easy to digest. So I'll do something like some kind of whey isolate, 2 scoops. Whey isolate's super water soluble too, so you can mix like 2 scoops of whey with 6 ounces of water. It's not
you're not drinking sludge.
Yeah, you're not drinking sludge, and you're not drinking like 30 ounces out of bed.
Right.
2 scoops of whey isolate, and then I'll do like oats, raisins, maple syrup. That's a good way to get in like a pretty solid meal from a calories perspective right away. And then 2-3 hours later, around 8:39, you can have more of like a breakfast, eggs, sourdough, that kind of stuff. Because it's hard to like
breakfast.
Double breakfast is a cheat. That's a must for getting big.
Yeah.
What about you?
No, I like that. Well, I will answer your question. I'm not dodging it. But like, how many meals a day are you typically eating? Especially with the amount of calories. Like, I don't care if you're cutting or bulking, you have some high calories regardless.
Yeah. Right now, I try and eat 4 real meals, whole food.
Nice.
Those consist of eggs, sourdough, beef, rice, some combination of the 4. Yeah. And then I'll have that breakfast, so whey and oats. And then I'll have usually a post-workout shake or post-workout chocolate milk or something like that. So it's 4 square meals with, I'll count that first breakfast of more of a snack just because it's not all whole foods.
So is it 4 square meals plus a snack, or you're saying 4 square meals?
4 square meals plus that first breakfast, plus a snack.
So you're eating 6 times.
Yeah. I find it gets hard to hit over 4,000 calories if you're not eating at least 6 times, because then if you're eating over 4,000 calories and just form each meal's 1,000 calories, and you can maybe do that once or twice a day, but it starts to get filling of like
Well,
whole
and
foods.
you probably lose like 10 pounds every time you travel.
So yeah, I mean, I've figured out ways to do better, and actually, the longer I've stayed heavy, it's my set point is just more comfortable here.
Yeah.
But I will lose weight, especially if it's a longer trip. I'll lose weight. It's like my problem traveling is getting enough calories, not overeating.
Yeah. That makes sense. So that was like my buddy Luke Davison. Shout out Luke. He was on I don't know, maybe around episode 30 or 40. But he would, anytime we'd go on road trips, he'd have to bring like a blender and like olive oil and oats and whole milk, and otherwise we'd be on a wrestling trip. He wasn't eating this 2,000 calorie shake every day on top of meals. He'd come back 5-10 pounds lighter.
Exactly. Especially when I was in college wrestling, I would lose so much weight on a trip. Like nationals alone, I think day one I weighed in at like 250, and day 3 I weighed in at 241.
Hey, that's crazy.
You're just tanking. Like you're wrestling all the time. You can't. It's when you're competing, it's almost impossible to eat enough calories.
Yeah.
So
a lot of NFL guys are having that issue during the year too, where they lose weight throughout the season.
For sure, it's a huge. I think it's probably one of the biggest issues NFL strength coaches face is how to keep players heavy throughout the year. And football is like heavyweight wrestling. Being a certain weight is a really important attribute.
It is crazy to me how many football players or like heavyweight wrestlers, once they finish, they're like, I'm sick of holding all this mass. Like 99% of them go on, like try to lose 30 to 50 pounds, like right when you finish.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people do that. I tried to do the opposite.
You're like, no, this is too easy. I got to maintain and continue to eat more.
It's like, now I can just be a meathead and not worry about wrestling.
It is easy to put on weight when you're not wrestling, man. I like it, even coaching. I mean, sometimes I was wrestling more than in-season wrestling because, I mean, you're not cutting weight at the end of the day on like a Saturday or Sunday, but there's times you're wrestling 3-4 days or 3-4 times in a day when you got individuals with some of your athletes and stuff. Man, you're trying to play catch up eating all day. So once you don't have, all these extra workouts, it's easier to hit your calories.
What have you noticed since you've been trying to add muscle? We're on the road to 200 pounds for Ryan. But Ryan,
we're taking the scenic route.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Ryan wanted to do it like sustainably in a healthy way, not gain weight too fast. But what have you noticed? What are some things that are working for you? What are some of the biggest challenges? And based on the challenges, what have you learned how to work around those?
Yeah, I think like we already talked about, food, huge. Hard to get all your calories in if you're not eating snacks throughout the day. I liked second breakfast. I used to do that a lot when I was wrestling, and I haven't been doing second breakfast recently. So maybe I'll, start eating 5 or 6 times instead of 4 or 5 times. So that's probably a good idea. I do think going through phases is good too, where, kind of going high rep, hypertrophy stuff, and then starting to, I also think low rep stuff's important because even though, technically like you can gain size or you can gain strength without gaining, size. I've found like if I'm pushing heavier weights, like you're putting on mass, especially when you can eat to support that. Like it's a little different when you're in season in a sport, just trying to maintain something. And then I feel like I got to play the line of like volume. I think there's a direct impact. I know people have different opinions on that, but more volume I do, I feel like you just like force your muscles to grow. Not that that's like a fast process. Like I definitely am not the most patient person and feel like it's taking longer than it should. Like I wish it was yesterday that I got out of victim weight, you know, but,
Some way.
but, I do think that like hard sets to failure really like training where you're almost like a little anxious going to the gym, like, ooh, I got to throw some weight around today. That's when I feel like I'm growing the most and I'm able to put on size. And then I also think that kind of training, just maybe it's psychological, but I feel like it's easier to eat more. Like I'm like, oh yeah, I need calories right now. I'm not going to waste this training session and not, refuel behind it.
Yeah, that's makes a lot of sense. I like what you said about being like lifting some heavy weight. I think it depends on the time frame you look at. The most efficient way to gain weight over like the time frame of let's say like a program like between 6 and 12 weeks, let's call it, is probably true hypertrophy training, which is a little higher rep. Although exact, like it's hard to denotate like at 8 reps, hypertrophy ends and neurological starts. It's more like a culmination of everything in your program. But it's the reps, the rest times, the kind of your goal for the program. But what I will say is as you get stronger, like you take a longer term purview over a couple of years, if you're able to get a lot stronger, you can then move more weight in your hypertrophy training, which in turn helps you grow more. So being strong is an underrated aspect of being big. And I think it's actually something a lot of people miss because they'll just consistently hit hypertrophy training and not really change up, to your point, not really cycle through different kinds of programming. And then they leave some gains on the table because they're not actually getting stronger. And then they're not able to progress their lifts in hypertrophy as much as they would otherwise.
Yeah, I think too, that's like totally agree with what you're saying. At the same time, the mental aspect of it, when you're switching between stuff, if you've been doing like high reps for a long time and like you start slowly lowering down reps, it keeps it interesting and fun, I think. And then the same thing when you're, pushing heavy low rep sets and then going back to high reps, it keeps it interesting, more engaging. I think it's easier to follow that. I think there's always going to be some level of like mundane. I mean, you got your big movements that are going to be good for you, and there's some different variation, but every program's doing some variation of, a squat, a hinge, a press, different pull movements. So I think that part of it too makes it fun, so that week over week, you have almost different goals you're shooting for. And yeah, I don't know. I think following a program, also something that I didn't mention earlier, just holds you so much more accountable. It's so much easier to just like show up and kind of do what you always do. But then when you're writing it down, you're kind of like, I did this last week. I did this the week before. I need to increase the weight, or I need to get more reps on this. So yeah. I think that's huge.
Yeah, for sure. What's your program like right now?
Yep. So I'm switching programs. I think I'm going to go run our old school program. I think that's my next one.
Oh, that one's hard.
I was looking at it yesterday and I'm like, I think it's time. I just got done traveling. I think it's a good time to lock in and hit this one.
Yeah, that one's hard. That one has kind of a blend of it all. You start with a lot of higher rep stuff, and then you end up with some pretty heavy low rep at the end.
Yeah, it's a good one, and I think I'm at a good point where I feel like I got the lifestyle to support it right now. Just was busy last couple of weeks, where it's like probably not the right time to start this, and now it's go time.
Got time to dive in. This will be, by the end, you'll be, what are you right now after travel? What's the damage?
That's a good question. I haven't stepped on the scale since I got back, but I can. I'll text you tonight.
All right, we'll see. And then after, let's get a before and after doing this program, okay. Eating a lot of food. How much weight does Ryan gain?
Yeah, let's do it.
It really does come down to the food. I heard something interesting, and this is total bro science, but I like it. You know what microherm is?
Yeah.
Absolutely massive, controversial in some ways, but I mean, there's no two ways about it. The guy has a phenomenal physique and has had a phenomenal physique for a long time. And he says, muscle. Iron Summit is brought to you by Bridge Athletic. Looking for a way to streamline your training programs and deliver exceptional results? Check out our friends at Bridge Athletic. Their platform is packed with over 300 templates and 1,500 instructional videos, courtesy of subject matter experts like Exos, FMS, and Hyperice, making program design both efficient and impactful. Our listeners can take advantage of an exclusive offer. For a limited time, get your first 30 days free and your next month at 50% off when you use code Iron Summit, all caps. That's code Iron Summit, no spaces, all caps, for 30 days free plus 50% off your second month at bridgeathletic.com. Check it out and start assigning custom programs directly to your athlete's mobile device. Is nutrition. Strength is like powerlifting is joints.
So what part is like training?
Well, and then the training kind of matches that, yeah. But like you can, if you lifted really heavy and still ate in a big surplus, you're going to add weight. Yeah. If you did 2 reps of everything really hard, then you ate in a big surplus, you're still going to add muscle tissue. Maybe just not as optimally.
Yeah.
But really the lever to pull for adding muscle tissue is your nutrition.
So what about, I want to ask you about this. I think when you're trying to put on muscle, when you're trying to put on size, even if you're going to a strength phase where your reps might be lower for certain big compound movements, it can still be like a hypertrophy plan if you're doing a lot of accessory work that's higher 100%. Rep. And that's kind of what I feel like that's the kind of middle ground that I'm at, where it's like maybe my squats will go from, sets of 10 or 12 to down to, doing sets of 5, 4s, 3s. But then it's like you're still hitting, a set of 12 on leg press or on leg extensions, and so like you're saying, there's no like sliding scale of, hey, your body right now is in strength mode or it's in hypertrophy mode. And
it's a combination of all the entire program, what you're doing across days, weeks, months. Yeah, that's a great question. I think, you can absolutely be gaining muscle tissue. And there's actually a lot of science on, because when you hit the lower rep you go, and the more strength or neurological focused you go, the more type 1, like fast twitch muscle fiber you're activating. Yeah. And then which less of your muscle in general, some people have a lot of it, but less of most people's muscle tissue is type 1. And then the higher rep you go, and I'm going to mess this up. There's 2 types of type 2 muscle fiber, but one of them is the slow twitch. Yeah. That's what like you grow the most, but the type 1 fast twitch muscle fiber grows faster. It responds faster. So if you want to add weight really quick, you can lift really heavy, eat a lot of food, you're going to gain muscle tissue pretty quickly. You just have less like room to grow because you're growing less of your muscle in general.
Yeah. I think the other thing too with that, that's super interesting. I don't know if I've ever heard it explained that way. The other thing too is like, when I look at this, there's definitely like a straight path of that's like the most optimal way, the fastest way, the best way. But I also think like part of like lifting weights is so that you're capable in situations, and so I think like strength is super important, as well as size. Like you don't want to just be beach muscles guy. But that being said, what do you think about, I'm sure you've wrestled somebody like this where they're either super strong in the weight room and not functionally strong, if that's what we're gonna call it, like functionally
Yeah,
in a
wrestling. Yep.
in a wrestling match, in a fight, whatever is not, or vice versa, where you see somebody that struggles in the weight room, but then you wrestle them and you're like, wow, they're pretty strong. It doesn't really translate. Because for me, most of the time when I see somebody that's strong in the weight room, they're strong on a wrestling mat in a, grappling environment. But there are those disconnects, and I just don't understand why that is. What do you think about that?
Um, couple things. I think wrestling is it's a unique example of this, where the number one thing I think that determines if someone feels strong in wrestling, or one of the biggest factors, is their grip strength.
Yeah,
Which you
that's
don't
right.
necessarily have to be gym strong to have crazy grip strength, because that's like your point of contact in wrestling. If someone has crazy grip strength, like, whoa, this person feels strong. But then as you wrestle them, you might figure out like, oh, they're not as strong as they feel, or they not like don't have that explosive aspect. So that's one thing. And two, wrestling is so much about position. If you are able to hold a strong position, you can feel a lot stronger than, like, if you're really sound positionally, you can feel a lot stronger than you are. You can kind of trick someone. But that being said, if you're weight room strong and you're in good position and you have got good grip strength, you're going to feel, those are the guys that are going to feel the strongest.
I hear you, but I still like just knowing it and feeling it. Like I've been around guys that are struggling to squat 185, but then you wrestle them and you're like, they have pretty heavy hips. And then I've been around like guys that, can squat 405 for 10, and you wrestle them and you're like, it just doesn't translate, and so I don't
For
know.
sure. But like, what's that guy deadlift? What's that guy lat pull down? Like in wrestling, there's like,
He was pretty strong in pretty much every lift. He was pretty dang strong. And I'm not saying he was like weak on the mat by any means, but
but was he a great wrestler? Was he
I wouldn't say,
positionally solid? See, that's,
yeah, I mean,
if you have
that,
the guy
yeah,
that, if the guy that squatted 185 could squat 405, he'd feel even stronger, right? Like when he'd hit, does that make sense?
yeah, yeah. I hear you.
I
I just,
agree with what you're saying. I've totally felt the same phenomena. You're like, wait, actually, we had a kid on our team who was like known to be he was on flow all the time. His name was Austin Mays. Do you remember Austin Mays?
yeah, yeah.
He was a huge recruit out of high school. He could roll frying pans. He could rope climb, like no legs, like jump up the rope, like
That's
throw
crazy.
himself.
Yeah.
But then you put him under a barbell bench and he was like not that strong. His levers weren't good for it, but he was strong in other ways that mattered more for wrestling.
Yeah.
That being said, like even if like as Austin's bench improved, he felt even stronger wrestling. Like there's things, I do hear what you're saying, but I also think like the stronger, there is some correlation between it. Plus, as you get bigger, you feel stronger, which that's probably, I think, the most underrated thing about being in the gym is like if you can just add muscle tissue and then train that for wrestling, that's better than adding fat tissue.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have more bang for your buck.
Well, what do you think about like sleeper builds where you see somebody and you're like, there's no way they can lift that, and then they throw up a bunch of weight? Or you hear about those stories where there's like a mom whose child is under a car and they deadlift a 2,000-pound car. Like, do you think certain people like are able to like turn their CNS off more than others or something? Or like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think there's some kind of range there that some people can tap into a little bit more than others. And this is purely like, I'm an idiot. Don't take this with any scientific whatever. But it's weird that some people can do stuff, not look like they can do that stuff. And then there's some people that, they look at and they can play the part. And there's just a big range there.
Well, I think but this is a great chance. I want to correct myself. Type 2 is fast twitch. Type 1 is slow twitch.
Okay.
And then there's two types of, I looked it up here. There's two types of fast twitch.
I love that you corrected yourself.
I know. I needed to, though. It was bothering me.
I know. I can tell.
But
we need a moderator.
slow type 1 or slow twitch muscle fibers are like what grows the most during hypertrophy. I think that's what most people's muscles have a primary makeup of. And then there's type 2A, which is kind of like in between slow twitch and fast twitch. And then there's type 2B, which is like all explosive strength.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the reason I wanted to correct myself, but bring it up is like if someone has a bunch of type 2B fast twitch muscle fibers, they're going to be able to like hit that 1 rep. So they can look a lot more like a noodle, but then be like they have more of their muscle fiber that's geared towards moving a 1 rep max. But that same person's not going to do as well as someone who has more of type 1 and type 2A muscle fibers under like a 15 rep max or like long distance running. So that's one. And then 2, you said turn off your CNS. I think it's more like certain people are better at fully turning on their CNS or operating closer to max strength. And that's just probably genetic.
Yeah. That's interesting. The going back to the type 1, type 2 muscle fibers. I mean, I remember my dad saying that all growing up, like, when you're sprinting versus, trying to drive somebody on an offensive line, and having different types of muscle fibers and different builds for different people. I do think there's probably just in terms of genetic buildup, like there's a certain percentage that's way better for one sport versus the other. Because there's definitely some, like football players, you probably want to be really explosive. So you want a lot of the type 2. Yeah. But like in wrestling, if you're super explosive, I think that's helpful. But you don't want that muscle fiber seems to take more oxygen. And so like your cardio is not as good. So
and you know those, that muscle fiber doesn't have as much endurance. So that's what wrestling is, a super interesting sport because it's this I think it's a huge combination of being able to be really strong, but then being able to use that over a longish period of time. 7 minutes is a long sprint. And it is a sprint.
I mean, I had coaches growing up and not that they were like, fitness experts, but they'd be like, oh, all that muscle mass on this guy, it's taking up so much oxygen. But I think it kind of depends what kind of muscle mass it is. And there are just some naturally, like people that naturally have better cardio, and you can train it for sure. What's up, guys? If you're looking to level up your training, click the link in the description and check out the Iron Summit Gains Emporium. Our strength training plans are designed to help you pack on muscle. And with our software, you can track every workout right from your phone. Plus, you'll have direct access to us for any questions along the way. Don't just train, level up your training. But there's definitely people baseline where they do a lot better. And I think part of that, honestly, is like where you're born. Like, have you seen any of those studies on like Tibetan, like, guys that are Sherpas that are helping people climb Mount Everest, and they can, I mean,
they have bigger
fly up
heart
the mountains.
And lungs. Yeah. Compared to their body. Yeah. There's all sorts of genetic factors. That's like in their DNA. So have bigger hearts and lungs. But I think it definitely makes a difference. And how you train from a young age makes a difference. Cardio is not, I know like the stigma around cardio is like that's something that you change quickly or slowly, but the truth is like you build a cardio base from a young age. And then if you're big but you've been doing cardio for a long time, you're probably going to be able to use that muscle mass. Wrestlers, I think the old school thoughts probably, like you said, like, oh, that guy's got all this muscle, he's going to tire out quick. But the truth is, some of the best heavyweight wrestlers are huge and they're in great shape. They have a ton of muscle mass, but they can go the whole time. Lucas is a great example. Lucas was known for being a goer, like wrestling hard for the whole match, and he was pretty big. So it's like, I think there's ways to train it, but you got to train it and you got to train it hard. It's definitely harder because you got to provide more oxygen to the muscle mass, but you can do it.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is, I mean, like anything, you get efficient at movements. And so part of it is like what positions you get in, if I'm talking specifically, wrestling, and then some people, the mental side of it too. Like, I know you've been there where there's, 2 minutes left in a match and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to get to the end of this match, but you just got you got to figure it out. Like you're exhausted. So yeah, it is interesting how there's a big combo of things that you can definitely train. You can do what you can do, but there's also definitely a genetic component. And
For sure.
like you said, the how you grew up, what you were eating when you were young, what your physical habits were when you're younger.
Epigenetics. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's probably epigenetics is probably changing the expression of which muscle fiber type you're going to bias towards. Which is, and that's bro science, but it makes sense.
It does. I wonder what degree you can, I don't know if we'll ever know that, but like what degree can you actually improve / change that versus like, this is a hand you're dealt. You can max out your potential, but you're never going to, hit a certain level.
I think that's it. You get dealt the cards you get dealt genetically, but then how you live as a kid, what you're doing as a kid, and then throughout your adolescence into college, that expresses like where you are in the cards you were dealt. Are you operating at the upper end of the threshold or at the lower end? That's what epigenetics, I think, determines. You can't outdo your genetics. Like there's some limiting factor to it.
Unless you have performance enhancers.
That's the way to do it.
But
great
I think
equalizer.
It makes a lot of sense. Like children's emotional intelligence is definitely based on like how they grew up, what kind of like parenting style was around them, what they saw in their lives, what kind of relationships they had from a young age. So it is interesting. It's like, it's probably a good reason to throw your kid into some kind of sports when they're young instead of, letting them just do whatever. Then they're 12 years old and never played a sport. That is interesting.
Well, I think I've known a lot of bodybuilders, strength sports athletes come from combat sports backgrounds or football backgrounds. And I think those two sports out of like, just like the big American youth and high school sports are more strength based. So it's probably you're expressing more of those epigenetics. And I think wrestling, I'm a bias towards it, but there's less risk of head injury than with football. And it's probably a little more, especially at a young age, strength based than football. Football's like explosive and quick, but you're not like, in football, you're not like grabbing and holding on to someone and like squeezing for a long period of time. Whereas wrestling is resistance training in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So I think it expresses those genetics. And that's why you look at wrestlers in general, they're kind of individuals. And it's probably just because they've been doing it from a young age. I know there's a lot of wrestlers who don't lift. They just wrestle. Like at a high level, and they're pretty built. Just wrestle.
Yeah.
Did you see the clip last year, or I think it was last year before the Olympics? Aaron Brooks was talking about it. They're like, "What's your lifting like? You're strong, you're big for the weight." He's like, "I don't lift."
I don't get when guys say that. Like, I understand that's your MO or whatever, but it feels like that's a low hanging fruit to lift some weights. Because if you're doing well and you're strong without it, why wouldn't you spend your time in the weight room?
I agree. I mean, look, I'm the biggest proponent of lifting weights. I love lifting weights. But to play devil's advocate, and we talked about this with Coach Pat, like the most important principle in athletics is a law of specificity. And to get better at wrestling or to get stronger for wrestling, the most important thing you can do is wrestle. So why not just spend more time doing that? Where I do think
because there's a recovery curve too.
Yeah. But where I think that methodology runs out of juice is when you're trying to change like a weight class, or you need to change the amount of muscle tissue you have, go down a weight class or up a weight class. Like you're not going to add a lot of muscle tissue wrestling. Like you're just not going to get that same bang for your buck as you are lifting weights. And I think like lifting weights is it's more specific for training your muscles. So use it when you want to train your muscles, whereas when you want to train for wrestling, wrestle. But there is overlap, and it's not like your body knows the difference.
Yeah. I agree. There's definitely resistance training. You get super strong from like a sport where you're physically, manipulating somebody else with your body and they're resisting with their body. But that being said, I do think the reason I don't understand that argument of like, oh, I don't lift weights, it's worked fine for me. It's like you're strengthening your tendons, your ligaments, you're continuing to get blood flow to your muscles. It's also an easier thing to recover from as long as you're doing it, in a good way where you're not blowing out volume and, you're not lifting the wrong way. Right. But you can't wrestle optimally for more than, hour and a half, maybe 2 hours in a day. And a lot of that better be technique.
Right. Which is dialed back. Like you can't live wrestle for more than probably 2 hours in a week. You're going to be really hurting. Yeah. It's going to be so hard to recover from.
But that's what I'm saying is like, it's additive to your training, because if you were like, hey, I'm going to take this 3 hours a week that I was going to lift 3 1-hour sessions and I wrestle, yeah, maybe, but you're not going to be able to do that at like a live wrestling pace. And you could still do drilling with those hours and then add lifting on top of it. And then you're strengthening your muscles, your tendons, your ligaments.
At Iron Summit, we are about getting everything we can out of our workouts and everyday lives. If you aren't wearing a pair of barefoot or wide toe box trainers, you are leaving gains on the table. The Sashi Athletics Ronin Ichi Minimalist Trainer is a perfect barefoot shoe. Not only does it perform like other major brands on the market, it is actually good looking. Even my wife says so. Get a pair today for 10% off with the code IronSummit10. Link is in the bio.
So I don't know. I just don't understand that.
I agree. And to maybe put it in a different context, this is a big argument in powerlifting. Why would you do anything if you're going to compete in powerlifting besides squat, bench, and deadlift? The law of specificity says you should only squat, you should only deadlift, and you should only bench. And there's a whole camp and a whole community of coaches that's all they do. Yeah. They'll do variations maybe, kind of like wrestling, like live versus drilling, versus sparring situations. Yeah. Like they'll do your competition bench, then they'll do block bench, then they'll do off the pins. So like a dead bench off the, like you set the rack at a certain height and bench. So you can do all these different variations. That's all you're doing is squatting, benching, and deadlifting. Or there's powerlifting coaches who will prescribe the bench and then accessories, and then the squat and then accessories that are not those exact movements, but are complementary to it. And those are two camps. And I think there's arguments for both. Personally, I enjoy the accessories. So that's kind of always the route I went down. And I think you can like attack weak spots better, that sort of thing. But that's another context to look at it through and I think that's one of the great debates in athletics is like specificity versus training.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. And there's so many good arguments on every side. Like I don't think it's obvious to me that's why I like asking, I asked Dr. Pat last week too, I guess 2 weeks ago, like where he slides on the scale of, do the same thing all the time and just progressively overload and you're fine, or switching up your training and, continuing to get a novel stimulus. And there were like heated arguments on both sides and there's good points for both. So I think you got to kind of experiment on your own. But I'm with you. I think it's really hard to just do like the three big lifts over and over. And I think that works to a certain point, like if you've never lifted before and you're just doing those 3, you're probably going to see a lot of progress. But if you've been doing it for 10, 20, 30 years, like you might need some more variation, or if you're working around an injury or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. Where do you fall on it?
In power, well, it's confusing because in powerlifting, there's like some of the strongest dudes in the world really follow the law of specificity and basically only do variations of each of the big 3.
Yeah.
And some of the other strongest dudes in the world do a ton of accessories. So like, I don't know if there's like a winning formula. And same in wrestling.
Right.
I know some, even within like the most dominant team right now, Penn State, there's certain guys that like just wrestle all the time. There's certain guys who lift a bunch of weights. Like, it's just, one thing I do know is if you're gonna lift weights or do the accessories, like do them and don't try and mimic your sport in the weight room. Don't try and be like quote unquote functional. If that's like, if this is, it's like a little bit of a paradox or a logical fallacy. Like if you're trying to mimic wrestling in the weight room, just go wrestle.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. I think that's a great point. Although there are some people that make a lot of money going against the grain, doing functional patterns, doing different, but
that argument doesn't make sense to me, because a functional pattern, the most functional pattern for wrestling is wrestling.
Yeah.
So then as that coach, you should just slowly have the realization that I should just wrestle. My athletes should just wrestle.
Yeah, take it to the next extreme. What's the most functional thing for shooting a single leg? It's shooting a single leg.
Exactly. Whereas if you're saying, no, that's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about you. I want to add muscle tissue or condition this certain muscle, or, get blood flow into the muscle during season for recovery. But we're going to do that through tried and true proven weightlifting exercises and modalities. When you're in the weight room, that's what we're doing. When you're on the mat, you're wrestling. That's at least logical to me. You've separated the two. You're attacking each for specific reasons. You're not trying to mimic your wrestling match in the weight room.
Yeah.
Because that's not a logical fallacy, whereas like functional movement patterns is a bit of a logical fallacy, because the most functional movement pattern is wrestling.
And I agree with you 100%. The other thing that's interesting that I'd love to hear your take on is kind of going back to, talking about like doing combat sports when you're young. And you see little kids, like they're like 8 years old, and you're like, why does that little kid have an 8-pack? Like, but the other thing is gymnastics, dude. Gymnastics is such a like foundational physical literacy sport. I think it's a great sport. But I think part of the reason gymnastics works so well, and something that I've seen people do a lot, is just like frequency training, where like you have to be in a specific situation to do it. But if let's say you had a squat rack, you work out you're working at your gym, Max, and you're working on above the gym, every, 2 hours you go down and do a set of 10 of squats. I don't know. Have you ever done that kind of training where you're like, let me try to hit, instead of 1 hour workout, let me break it into, 4 or 3 or 4, blocks of training, 15 minutes here or 20 minutes here?
I've never done that myself, but I can see an argument for it. I think it goes to that law of specificity. The more you do something, the better you're going to get at it, the more efficient you're going to get at it. So I could see that. I do think there's, especially when we can bring this back to like adding size and, trying to add muscle tissue, there's certain things that happen when you train consistently for a couple hours that just aren't going to happen to you. Like metabolites produced. This is where it starts getting way above my pay grade, but like the chemical interactions that are happening within your muscle when you do 2 hours of chest versus chest every 4 hours, it's just different. But
sorry, keep going.
No, I think, but there is arguments for both. And that's like, we talked about that last week, was like the frequency versus volume
debate. But I'm talking like almost extreme volume, because you look at somebody that like works with their hands all day, their forearms are huge, right? And it's not like it's not like a 1 rep max on, squeezing something, but it's like all day they're swinging a hammer, or all day you're, doing something with your hands, and weeks of just like that small stimulus build up. So yeah, I don't know
I think
that
if you had all the time in the world to just vote, I think, and this has been shown through sciences, there's basically a direct correlation between volume and size and strength. And there's really no cap to it. As long as you're able, and we talked about this with Pat, like to recover from it.
Yeah.
Which means you're fueling enough, you're sleeping. Like, because if you can't recover from it, then there's actually, you start getting diminishing returns, and then even you can have be hurting your progress. But yeah, there's no real, as long as you can recover for it, there's no cap to the amount of volume you can be doing.
Yes.
So that's the crux, is the recovery. Do as much as you can and recover from it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. Well, and just practically, like, it'd be really hard to do, but I don't know. I'm fascinated by it. Like, just let's say you take an exercise and take it to an extreme. You do it every single day. And I'm not saying you crush yourself every day where you're hurting yourself, but I have a hard time believing, like, if you did a set of 10 squats for moderate weight every single day, that your legs wouldn't get bigger over time. Is that the fastest path? I don't know. But I think it's interesting because we don't think of training that way. And it would definitely be something like a shock to most people's bodies, unless you have some kind of job where every single day you're doing some kind of lifting with your legs like that.
Yeah. I think maybe this is probably an oversimplification, but that would be best for strength. Especially with something that's as taxing as squatting, you'd have to be just like eating a crazy amount of food, sleeping perfectly, or on performance enhancing drugs to be able to recover from squatting every day. Even if it's, well, let's put it this way. 1 set of 10 a day isn't actually that crazy a volume. You squat 1 set of 10 every day for, let's say, across a week, that's 70 reps. You easily get that in 1 leg day, right? But if you were doing like 5 sets of 10 every day, now you're going to be really pushing the volume, but then you're going to have a hard time recovering from it. But there is a program. It's called the Smolov squat program. It's really well known. It's known to like blow up your squat numbers. And you basically squat multiple times a week. I think it's almost every day. But almost everyone who's run it is like, I squat super strong, but I feel terrible. Like my knees hurt.
Squat-tober.
Yeah. And there's also, when you start approaching that amount of volume, there's the red tissue versus white tissue dilemma, which your muscles can adapt way quicker than your joints and ligaments, than your ligaments and tendons. Your white tissue is your ligaments and tendons, your muscles, your red tissue. Red tissue adapts way faster. So basically when you do that, your muscles outpace your joints and tendons. And that's actually like a problem as athletes as a whole have right now, is we've gotten so good at strength training that we're getting, like, that's why rates of injury in the NFL, or it's hypothesized, that's why rates of injury in the NFL are so much higher than they used to be. Even high school athletes, ACL tears are way up. And it's because we're stronger than we used to be. But and our soft tissue doesn't adapt like our muscle tissue. So that's like something you got to keep an eye on when you're taking all this into account. If you were just trying to grow to get big, like for muscle mass, sure. But then you got to be really conscious of injury.
Yeah, I mean, if you get big for a month and then you get hurt and you're out for 6, like 1 step forward for 3 steps back.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. I think that's something that I'm sure bodybuilders deal with a lot, where your muscles get so strong that you're hurting. Your injury risk goes way up. You're putting all this force on your tendons and ligaments, and you're getting close to a show or something, and you tear something.
That's why bodybuilders, I mean, the lightweight higher rep training is great for hypertrophy, but I think the second aspect to that is it allows them to not get hurt. Or like the intensifier methods, like 5-second negatives, or like 1.5 reps, shorter rest, that kind of stuff allows you to push the intensity of your training without just pushing the weight, which keeps you healthier in the long run.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. One last question for you. You still hitting cluster sets right now, Max?
No, I just stopped, but I was actually going to bring that up. I'm glad you asked. Cluster sets are awesome because it's a way to kind of it's like
maybe explain real quick what a cluster set is.
So a cluster set is you take the reps you want to achieve, and that can range from really low, like 3, to high 15, 18. And what you do is you basically, you can do you can break into 2 or 3 clusters. So we'll take like 15, for example. Rather than doing 15 straight, you do a set of 5, rest for 20 to 30 seconds, another set of 5, rest for 20 to 30 seconds, and then a final set of 5 to get 15 total. That allows you to do, going back to earlier in our conversations with like strength versus hypertrophy training, you kind of get a little bit of both, because you're able to get more weight than you would be able to get for 15 straight for 3 sets of 5, but the rests are so short, it's still kind of, you're definitely pushing more of that hypertrophy type feel, but you basically get to increase your intensity, which is the weight moved, while still achieving a high volume or a higher volume. But then you can take that all the way down to like 3 reps. You could, like, if you're training for powerlifting, you can do 1, rack it for 30 seconds, 1, rack for 20, 30 seconds, 1 to get 3. But you could get much more weight for 3 sets of 1 with 20 to 30 seconds. Not much more, but more weight for 3 sets of 1 than you could for 3 straight. Yeah. So it's a way to push in volume and intensity at the same time, which is an oversimplification. I'm probably not doing it justice, but I love training that way. It's really fun. I've seen excellent results from it.
Yeah, no, that was fun. We hit some cluster sets on some squats and some hack squats and some bench not too long ago, and it was a good time.
It is. It's amazing how it like sneaks up on you too. You get done with the first set and you're like,
this is easy.
Yeah. Second set of
Third
5,
set, you're like, uh-oh.
Yeah, this sucks. It shows like 20 seconds isn't that much rest. So by the end, you're really feeling it, but those little mini rests let you push more weight for the same amount of reps. Yeah. Like artificially inflating your intensity across pretty high volume.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great intensifier for training for sure. And hopefully you're doing it. Like when you're doing it, pick the right weight, because you'll think it's fine, and then your third set, if you're failing, hopefully you got some spotters or something. You're not dropping weight right on your throat.
Yeah. What my coach, to pick a weight for clusters, I think this is really helpful. This is what my coach Miller taught me, is you basically warm up and then find your max set of 12. And then that's what you should use for your cluster set of 15. So
15
like
broken 5, 5, 5, not 15,
yes.
50. Yeah.
Yeah. So you find your max reps for 12, like a RPE 9.5 for 12. Like I got that, but like clean, but it was hard. And then take that for 5, 5, 5.
Yeah. No,
and then
good.
try and progress that 5, 5, 5 by a little bit each week. Yeah. It's a fun way to train.
Yeah, it really is. Awesome, Max. Well, I think that was awesome, and yeah, hopefully somebody got something out of it, and we can I don't know, keep experimenting on our own bodies, what works best for us.
Heck yeah! I feel like you just interviewed me today, but
no, not at all.
I wanted to hear about Ryan's path to 200, but we'll get some updates on that. We'll get some updates.
It's coming along.
It's coming. All right. See ya.
Bye.
Boom.